Welcome back to another sad, sobering episode of What Happened, the show where we dig up the embarrassing, dusty skeletons of video game disasters, both small and large, bad and worse, and stinky and stinkier. We've covered games so far on this show that were all somewhat destined to fail for one reason or another, either from overly lofty ambitions, marketing sleaze-dicks, or just plain stupidity. Today's subject, however, is far more tragic, as not only were we punished with a less than ideal piece of electronic entertainment, not only did it result in the closure of an entire company, but we were also denied an interesting title in its own right that was brimming with potential. Today, dear viewer, our subject is Final Fight Streetwise. In the mid-aughts, Capcom was putting out hit after hit across the current generation of consoles. You have your Onimushas, your RE4s, your Devil May Cries, your Phoenix Wrights, but while all these games were distinctly Japanese, distinctly Capcom, there were a few titles produced by the company that were not handcrafted by superstars like Shinji Mikami, Hideki Kamiya, or Shu Takumi. To properly tell the tale of Final Fight Streetwise, you have to start with a little known and even less existing team within the Capcom umbrella, and that is, of course, Production Studio 8. Founded in the late 90s in Sunnyvale, California, the small team started life as Capcom Digital Studios, with the head of the company being one David Siller, notable creator of Crash Bandicoot and Aero the Acrobat. Within just a few years of growth, where they mostly worked on ports and canceled pitches, it was 1999 where they released their first major title, which, was,
Final Fight Revenge!
They lent their programming, art, and animation talents to this arcade fighter, but the project was mostly overseen by key members of Capcom Japan. David Siller himself was credited as co-director, along with Yoshiki Okamoto, who produced or was involved with almost every notable Capcom franchise you could shake a steel pipe at. Now, to keep a bad story short, Final Fight Revenge didn't do great. It saw very little distribution in arcades at the time.
You're already dead.
And received only one lonely port on the Japanese Sega Saturn, and Capcom hasn't spoken about it since. I've talked about it though, because I have a copy. Things, however, did get brighter for the company with their first solo game in 2002, a PlayStation 2 title based on the fantasy world of Ghosts and Goblins, Maximo: Ghost to Glory. This was their first fully 3D game, reviewed fairly well, and it was met with enough success to quickly greenlight a sequel, Maximo vs. the Army of Zin. David Siller would leave the company shortly after the completion of Ghosts and Glory and moved on to perennial Flophouse favorite Midway in 2003. So despite Production Studio 8's earlier encounter with Metro City being nothing short of an unmitigated oil drum fire, the success of two Maximo-sized notches in their belts convinced all parties involved that it was a good idea to bring Hagar, Cody, and Guy into the 21st century. It wasn't. Production Studio 8's new entry in the Final Fight franchise, released in February 2006 for the PS2 and the Xbox, got absolutely scathing reviews, and the company closed the very next month. So what happened? I'm not 100% sure exactly what happened here, because unfortunately there's very little concrete evidence we can mine from interviews, press releases, and the like. In fact, the company did 0 interviews during this time period, or even years after the fact, but I think we can safely assume a few things. With the freedom they were given to craft their previous titles in the Ghosts and Goblins universe, it seems the same carte blanche was handed to them once again to make something completely new for Final Fight. This resulted in the first iteration of the project, which was dubbed internally as Final Fight 7 Sons. We've spoken about this lost title multiple times, but it was Unseen 64 that first got details and footage of the game, which is what you're watching here, because for years no one even knew this early build even existed until 2011? It starred a fresh new character, although not named, and featured a subtle cel-shaded art style, something Capcom and Clover were already doing with Beautiful Joe and later Okami. The camera was also unique as it was utilizing a rail system that went from left to right to emulate old 2D side-scrolling rather than an awkward third-person camera seen in something like Fighting Force. You also had a huge bevy of moves at your disposal, as the main character employed a lot of punches, kicks, combos, throws, and could even enter a powerful Hulk-like state where they could really do some damage. It really seemed like Seven Sons was focused on an all-new cast of characters, or be based in a different city altogether. But, fortunately, we'll never know. What we can do is construct a timeline here. Now, Army of Zin was released at the start of 2004 for North America, but first hit Japanese shores months earlier, in September of 2003. Work must have began on Seven Sons in or around that time, and from then on out, to get a playable build up and running for a good old button basher, let's peg it around mid to late-ish 2004, more or less a year, where Production Studio 8 began showing the footage internally around Capcom for feedback. This is where things get really shitty really fast, as someone in a position of power clearly didn't like what they were seeing. We only have the blurb from Unseen 64 to work off of, but the story goes some higher-ups within the company felt this was the wrong direction to go in, and they should try to chase after the wafting urban scent of Grand Theft Auto. This might have been mandated by Capcom Japan, as they were the ones who actually published GTA in Japan, where both 3 and Vice City saw phenomenal week 1 sales, especially for Western-made games back in 2003. Thus, somewhere in late 2004, the decision was made to cut up on redistribute all the maps and assets they had, make them somewhat interconnected to mimic a sandbox, and give the entire game a complete presentation and story overhaul. The rebranded Final Fight Streetwise was announced in May of 2005 and threatened to come out later that winter. Capcom was sure they were onto a winner here, and were so confident with this strategy that they had already put into production another 3D beat-em-up, this time being made in Japan, that was doing the exact same thing. It was called Beatdown: Fists of Vengeance. This was almost indistinguishable from Streetwise in terms of story, aesthetic, and swear count.
God damn it! What the fuck happened here?
Shit!
What the fuck? You piece of crap.
That arrogant shit sack over there.
I never did like you, asshole.
You think I like sitting on the sidelines like a bitch?
Backstabbing motherfucker.
You can suppose that Capcom felt with a new IP developed in Japan, an American game based on a well-known franchise, and both of them being 3D action brawlers, surely one of them would find success. No! Beatdown released first in November of 2005 and sold terribly and reviewed even worse. Streetwise never even made that initial release date and was delayed to next February. Around this time, it always seemed that Capcom USA and Capcom Japan didn't communicate all that well, so maybe one of them realized that releasing two really similar games in the same quarter was, stupid. Now, when you have the bones of a game and you're told you need to give it a complete makeover in terms of aesthetics, tone, character, and story, it's gonna be a mess. You have to shift things around, repurpose assets that might never have been designed for what you now needed. Not the best way to put together a consistent and solid piece of entertainment. The Streetwise camera is big clunks as it smashes into everything and is a pain to control because the camera was meant to be on that rail system. There's lots of time wasting in the 4 major environments where it has you running from point A to point B over and over again as you complete really dull side quests and a bevy of hastily made minigames. We spoke to one Trent Caniuga a few years back who worked on Streetwise as a writer, concept artist, and was the voice actor for Kyle. And when he joined Capcom Production Studio 8, it was like a dream come true as he loved the company in his youth. However, when he came onto the project, it was, shall we say, in flux. The mandate had already been given to reskin everything in that sweaty, sleazy GTA sheen, but of course, without the polish or budget, so people were feverishly trying to slap this gritty, urban Mr. Potato Head together. Trent had to come up with a lot of concepts for characters in this new style, but he found when he tried to push the designs to be more unique or bring in more classic Final Fight characters like Poison or Sodom, he was often told by marketing to tone it down, make it more relatable and less colorful and over the top, which is why Streetwise has that dull, generic, gritty look we all hate and ignore today. If you want to see Trent speak more about this, check out his video on Streetwise concept art in the description below. Fascinating stuff. So that basically sums up everything about— No, you can't stop this train. What's next on this tour? Ports. Now, if Production Studio 8 was this busy trying to repurpose everything into this weird jigsaw of crime time fodder, how the hell did they have time to make this game for 2 different SKUs, the PS2 and the Xbox? Well, trick question, because they didn't. Secret Level, who you might know from being terrible, is the company who delivered such classics as Iron Man 2, and Golden Axe Beast Rider. They were hired by Capcom and got the honor of porting Streetwise to the Xbox, and just like all their previous work, it was not great. Yeah, the Xbox version is the inferior of the two and is plagued with save game issues where sometimes it'll just ignore your progress when you quit and save the game. Saving Streetwise, even on the PS2, is kind of a gamble because instead of being able to save anywhere, or like going up to a phone book or sleeping in a dumpster or to save your game, it'll only just save when it wants, mostly after when major story sequences are completed, and you'll sometimes get a journal updated message, but not all the time. On the PS2 it seems to behave fairly consistently, but on the Xbox you could lose hours of progress for no reason. Awesome. It's issues like everything I just said that contributed to Final Fight Streetwise's catastrophic reception to gaming and review outlets, and have placed an extensive list of top 10 worst games under various categories such as worst transition from 2D to 3D, worst GTA clone, worst Capcom game, etc. It's these reviews that incited complete public apathy towards the game, and it wasn't exactly trending on a wave of smiles and sunshine in the first place. Most people hated the transparent and sloppy attempt at being GTA when it was first shown months before, and wasn't going to change any minds when it finally released. This is a shame because you can clearly see love for the franchise dotted throughout the finished game. Various posters, Easter eggs, sound bites, cameos, and in-jokes from designers and artists who were forced into a less than ideal situation. When you aren't fighting the camera, Streetwise's fighting system is actually pretty enjoyable. You have lots of offensive and defensive options, and it feels good when you hit things. Definitely a holdover from Seven Sons. That's what makes this particular story so tragic. They had a solid foundation to work off of, but with a limited budget, time frame, and random 11th hour curveball with the aesthetic change, the team's passion just couldn't save it. It would be one thing if the game had sold okay, but I can't even find any reliable dollar metrics on just how poorly Streetwise did, but it's safe to assume the numbers were dismal. While most assume that Capcom closed Production Studio A due to them poor sales, it's been thrown around that it might have been always in the cards, as the publisher made other closures that year, most notably Clover, just a few months later. So there's some credence to the idea that they just wanted to cut costs across the board as we were entering a new generation. Unfortunately, this was the last major Final Fight release to ever grace us, unless you count the much more warmly received Final Fight Double Impact Collection, which you should. You can unlock the Final Fight episode of the USA Street Fighter cartoon, and that being said, even though Streetwise is a permanent stain on Final Fight's record, the characters and world of Metro City at least live on in Street Fighter, which, as we know, is as booming and as dominant of a force as it ever was. Okay, I'll stop. Sorry. If you know of any other catastrophic catastrophes in the game industry you'd like to see on What Happened, throw me some suggestions in the comments below, or hit me up at mattmcmuscles@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.